Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone else, depending on where you are joining us from. And welcome to our webinar on Young Voices for Eco-Social Innovations. This webinar is brought to you by the Global Research and Action Network for a New Eco-Social Contract, a joint program of the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, UNRISD, and the Green Economy Coalition. We are also happy to have Climate Vanguard as a co-organizer of this webinar. My name is Alex Semba, and I'm a research intern in the Gender Justice and Development Program at UNRISD. I'm also currently pursuing my master's degree in Analysis and Design of Social Protection Systems at Bonn-Reisig University of Applied Sciences here in Germany, which is funded by the German Academic Exchange Service, DAAD. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation today, and I'm honored to be your moderator. Before we get started, I would like to encourage you to introduce yourselves in the chat section by writing your name, your organization, and where you're joining us from, in order for us to just get a sense of who is participating in today's webinar. There's a separate Q&A section at the bottom of the screen where you can post your questions to our speakers. And please don't forget to visit our website and our social media pages so that we can interact with you further. Please note that we are live and the webinar is also being recorded. So as I mentioned earlier on, this webinar is organized by the Global Research and Action Network for a New Eco-Social Contract. And it brings together young practitioners and actors to discuss their innovations that combine social and ecological goals. In a dialogue format, our diverse group of speakers who are passionate about creating a sustainable future through their eco-social innovations will share their experiences, their challenges and opportunities in driving positive change in their communities and beyond. It is our belief that young people have a unique perspective on the world and are driving change like never before. So these voices are critical in shaping the future of our planet, and it is essential to provide such a platform to share experiences and insights. So throughout this webinar, we will delve into the innovative solutions developed by our speakers. First up, we will have a discussion by Srity and Jack Johnson, who will discuss the issues of gender-based violence and a lack of access to hygienic and affordable sanitary kits in Bangladesh. Srity will explain how she tackled these issues through innovation and the challenges she faced in the process. Next on our program, we will hear from Masoumi and Njavwa Mbao, who will talk about the situation in Afghanistan, where women's visibility and activism have been severely restricted under the Taliban rule. Saeed will share the opportunities he sees and how he conducted a feasibility study for the Afghanistan Online University Project, which aims to connect Afghans with science and education through an online platform. Finally, we will have Noah Herfort and Nawshin Tabassum, who will discuss the youth climate movement and how it has evolved over the past 4 years in the face of a global pandemic, political changes, and the worsening climate crisis. They will focus on youth-led initiatives to re-energize the movement. So after these discussions, our speakers will be ready to answer your questions. So please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A throughout the discussion. You're most welcome to specify which speaker you are addressing your question to, but you can also ask general questions and we will ensure that any of the speakers respond to them. So without further ado, let's begin with a discussion by Srity and Jack Johnson that focuses on the issues faced by young girls and women in Bangladesh. Srity is an intern working under Environment and Climate Justice Program at UNRISD. Besides, she's a master's student of Geography and Environmental Risks and Human Security at the United Nations University and the University of Bonn here in Germany. Jack, on the other hand, is the co-founder of Climate Vanguard. As a researcher and activist, he is a passionate He's passionate about transforming systems to emancipate people and the planet. Jack holds a degree in economics and international relations from the University of St. Andrews in the United Kingdom. So at this point in time, I would like to invite Srity and Jack to open the discussion. You have 12 minutes. The floor is yours. Over to you.
First of all, hello everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. And if you can't, please just let me know. So I'm Srity and I'm from Bangladesh. And today I'm going to talk about something that I have done a few years back. So back in 2019, Women Bangladesh launched a competition called Innovator Against Gender-Based Violence. And the idea behind the competition was to develop innovation or business solution that can end violence against women. So my team and I actually won the competition by pitching our concept for inexpensive, eco-friendly and biodegradable sanitary napkin that would raise awareness of gender-based violence through branding and sales. And beside, the idea was to empower survivors by engaging them in the production. So both violence against women and girls and poor management of menstrual cycle hygiene practice are actually a really big issue in Bangladesh. And I can say about a specific report that actually conducted by Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, and according to them, almost 29% menstruating women in the country use sanitary napkin. So it's actually really low number of people women who actually use it. So the idea was if anything could be a business product, then why not something that is essential for women? And sanitary napkin is something that a woman need on a regular basis. So you could, and so also other hand, you could easily convey message through them. So that was the initial idea behind it. And then after the competition, we began testing the pad materials during our pilot project. And after testing several prototypes, we developed washable pads that are affordable, environment friendly, and also good for women's health. And later we actually launched the product, and we named it Charu. And yeah, with every product, we include information about the health center where women actually can ask for help, and also include brochures on awareness against gender-based violence. And later, we actually done a few capacity building workshop on gender-based violence and associated myths, stereotypes, also the topic on menstrual hygiene into this discussion. And during that time, COVID pandemic came up, and we couldn't done a lot of in-person workshop training. But if you notice that during the COVID pandemic, domestic violence was one of the shadow pandemic. And that's why we try to thought about the situation and develop a considerable amount of communication material and conduct a few online workshops to raise awareness about gender-based violence. So that was the whole journey, what we have done, and try to include women health, gender-based violence, also think about it, environment. Yeah, thank you, Alex. That was all. And I think Jack can also include more.
Yeah, Srity, thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience running this project. Really incredible project and really powerful story. I guess one of the things that really strikes me in your story is your drive to respond by helping others who have also been the victim of gender-based violence. So I guess the first question that I'm wondering is, what prompted you to respond to your own experience of gender-based violence in a systemic manner rather than an individual one?
Okay, so if we think about gender-based violence, I think women or girls are the biggest victim of it. And girls, including children, faced almost 60% of sexual assault back in 2020-21. This was a report by UNDP Bangladesh published last year. So you can imagine how the situation is gender-based violence back home. And from my experience, when I was a child, or younger person, I didn't know whom to I talk, or later when I grow up, when I talk about it, people were not ready to help. So through all of my experience, like individual level or professional level, I always realized that, yeah, it's always you should start from your personal level, the awareness, but also like when you got a large platform, that actually gave you a chance to help other people. So I think this was something I realized from my personal level, but I also tried to implement that in the more systematic manner. Yeah.
I guess also building on that, what was then the response of breaking this culture of silence and shame around gender-based violence? And that could be the response from participants in the workshop or from wider communities as well.
Yeah. So the whole during the whole period, I actually got a lot of experience, all of them are kind of mixed experience. So there's a lot of people who actually appreciate it and they learn it and they actually become more brave than before to talk about it. But there's also a lot of people or particularly women who actually think this talking about gender-based violence or even thinking about it is actually kind of luxury for women and rich and educated women. So most of the rural women, sometimes they during the workshop they talk yeah, I fully depend on my husband. He's the man of the house and he's the owner of house, so he can do whatever he wants. So yeah, that is another response we got. And sometimes some people actually do understand it, but they don't know what to do because they can ask for help, but they are not economically, independent. So even they got support, but they after getting support, there is no sustainable way they can survive their livelihood or life. So there's a lot of mixed response. So yeah, I would say.
Great, thank you so much for that response. Another question I have is also based on your background doing disaster relief work. How do you really see the connection between gender-based violence and environmental justice, for instance?
Yeah, so I was always passionate about something more sustainable, that natural material. So when we were started pitching the idea, that was we was talking about cotton pads, but later we also found that if we really need organic cotton, that is not actually helpful, or that will not be cost effective, or even organic cotton needs a lot of water. So I think because my background was more environment and disaster, I always think about more something that could be eco-friendly. So later we actually developed this washable. So that's not something that also good for reproductive health, because the bad we got in the market, it's not just for harmful for environment, but also not harmful for women's health. So yeah, I think it's just not involve reproductive health or hygiene, but because of my background, I was try to include something more environmental thing. Yeah.
That's really interesting, sort of exploring the intersections of these compounding issues. And finally, I guess just a simple question is, what was your biggest learning from your time running this project?
Okay, I would say the biggest project, biggest learning is I still remember one of the time, after workshop, just one woman came to me and tell me that I understand all of them, what you told me during this whole time, but can you tell me this to my, or convince my husband, because I know what is wrong and what should I have to do, but I actually like involve both of the parties and have to like aware not just women but also have to include men in this kind of project and program. So yeah, that's I think was the biggest learning. And yeah,
That's great. Thank you so much, Srity, for sharing your experience running this project. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you too.
Thank you, Srity and Jack, for such an insightful discussion. It's really inspiring to see how such innovative solutions can actually be used to address complex issues like these. And Srity, a special thank you for sharing your personal experiences from which you actually developed this project. I would like to hear further, and I think our audience would like to hear further as well during our Q&A in terms of any further information around how probably this could be, replicated in other spheres. I do know that there are so many other areas where this is also an issue, not only in Bangladesh. So it would be great to hear more about that. And because of that, I would like to really as well encourage our audience to put up, their comments, their thoughts, or any questions in the Q&A so that we can discuss these further. We have a 15-minute set for our Q&A to tackle these further issues. At this point in time, I would like to welcome Syed and Njavwa. Syed is a junior research analyst supporting the Translating Research into Policy and Practice Bond program at UNRISD. He holds a master's degree in Sustainable Development Management from the Rhein-Waal University of Applied Sciences here in Germany. And his research background is in economics, education, environmental studies, and forestry. He specializes in sustainable development, climate change, and development policy. And Njavwa is a research intern in the Transformative Social Policy Program at UNRISD. She is currently also pursuing a master's degree in analysis and design of social protection systems at the Bonn-Rhein-Sieg University of Applied Sciences. And her focus area is on social policy, humanitarian aid, poverty and inequality, and child-sensitive social protection programming. Over to you, Syed and Njavwa. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. And just to quickly get into the conversation, as we all know, Afghanistan is actually in a crisis of gender inequality with a broken social contract, and the ongoing conflict has actually further exacerbated the situation for girls and women, limiting their access to education, healthcare, economic opportunities, and even the freedom of movement. So Syed, what is the situation of Afghanistan regarding gender backlash, and why do the Taliban hold such a position against women?
Thanks. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Alex, for the introduction. Thanks, Njavwa, for raising the question. So the situation of Afghanistan regarding gender backlash is concerning. Like after the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban in 2021, Taliban has a repressive and restrictive policy against women. Even they did it back in 1996 and 2001 in their first term. So, and the reason is they have their own perception and kind of interpretation of Islam law and regulation. Although we have so many Muslim majority countries around the globe, like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and you see that in their women and girls, they have the freedom and they have their human rights, they have access to education, they have access to work. They have a lot of freedom that they can enjoy from that. But when you look back in Afghanistan, girls, they cannot study further after the 6th grade. They cannot choose agriculture, engineering, and journalism degree programs at university. Even they couldn't get into the entrance exam of the university. So if you look into that situation, you see how restrictive the life has become for women and girls in Afghanistan. And it is concerning because you're making like half of the generation, half of the society disconnected from the social, economical life advancement. And that's really concerning.
Thank you, Saeed. And for sure, actually, this gender backlash is often stemming from a fear of losing traditional gender roles and power dynamics. And this backlash is a significant obstacle in the fight for gender justice. And this just brings me to the next question. What are some of the ways that women in Afghanistan are resisting this gender backlash and advocating for their rights? And how can the international community support their rights?
So there is two scenarios. One, we have Afghans who are residing in Afghanistan. They live in Afghanistan. They're advocating through protests, social media campaigns. They have their own networks, but kind of in a very low level, because there's a fear from the current government that they can be persecuted if they speak up much louder. And they're also doing some education empowerment program, like they teach like girls up 10 to 12 years old, basic school knowledge. And also they're doing, like through YouTube and other platforms, they educate other girls about different soft skills. But in terms of outside the country, there's a lot of networks, Afghan diaspora, they're trying to assist them, not only in Afghanistan, because after fall of Afghanistan, there's a million of refugees currently in Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, across Europe, and they need access to education to follow their dream, to pursue higher education, to obtain a degree and make their career. But in terms of international community, what they can do, they can make international aid conditional to the current government, if they accept the human rights, international conventions on women's rights. That's one thing. Next, they can also support women-led organizations inside Afghanistan when they are bringing intervention for the economic growth of women. That can be another step. And then there is, for sure, they rule the country. There is a need to do lobbying, diplomatic relationship discussions, to tell them the message of the world that you cannot be the only country that women cannot live, cannot work, cannot pursue the education. And that's like, even if there was a lot of criticism by Islamic countries that such act is not acceptable, and it is not acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most definitely. And we have also actually seen protests from even people from within the university, the male professors and the male students who are against this decision of the Taliban's banning women's education in the universities. We definitely commend the efforts of the women and also the international community on these efforts. And speaking of which, of course, there are initiatives that are being proposed, such as the Afghanistan Online University. Could you please tell us more about this online university? And in your opinion, how do you see its benefits and challenges in addressing the agency of education for girls?
Thanks, Njavwa, for highlighting that. So this concept is from World University Service. They had several meetings with Afghan diaspora, mostly in Europe, because after seeing such situation, in response to that, they're preparing the project so that there be an online university for Afghans in exile, with focus also in mostly for women and girls. The idea is to offer fully online, tuition-free bachelor, master, and PhD degrees for Afghans. But the thing is, like, there is a need for sure to bring such opportunity, but for sure there are challenges also. If you look into Afghanistan, the backbone of the country is quite agricultural, but again, we need more in other areas. But the thing, like how this university can assist in the long run, so it aims like to give them access to research, science, education, and give them access to real knowledge, more contemporary education, so that the human capital that will work in Afghanistan in future, they be equipped with competence and skills so that they can perform better. But on the other hand, it also includes not only Afghan origins, also non-Afghan origins who are interested in the topic and the culture, society of Afghanistan, if they have related research program. So that's how we see it. But more challenge will be inside Afghanistan. There is not 24/7 hours electricity. That can be one challenge. The internet is very low quality with high price. That can be another challenge. But there are also young people who can afford it, not only inside Afghanistan, in Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, which they host 1 million of Afghan refugees. And that can be a big help for them, because most of them just recently migrated to these countries for different reasons. And also the institutional setup and the capacity of current universities in Afghanistan are very low. After just fall of Afghanistan, around 220 professors abandoned the country due to different reasons. Either it can be security, personal threats, or different causes. So that's how this university can be a good response to these implications.
Definitely such a great initiative. And now looking into challenges that you have just spoken about regards to technology, resources, and funding, how do you see this university actually sustainable in the long run, and how can it actually advance development in Afghanistan?
Yes, like currently it's on the project concept phase, and the target funding is from European Union. That's the primary funding. But when I did a feasibility study on this project as part of my master thesis, so I mapped out different stakeholders that can assess or reduce the cost in terms of sustainability. We can have different agencies, like they can provide a scholarship. We can have joint degree programs so that we reduce the cost of professors. We can have access to library of another online university like International University, which is located in Germany. In terms of business model, there's also possibility to charge a small amount of assessment fee at the end of semester from students, so that we can have kind of supportive income for the university life. But on the other hand, there's also, like, for the initial phases for 5 years, with 5,000 students capacity, but it requires around 39 million euro annual budget, and that's too much. But there is possibility of funding from different sources. The idea is to establish it as a private university in Germany, so that it can benefit from the ecosystem of European university and Western universities. But so in this cycle of different contexts, it can be sustainable, but for sure it has its challenge also. So they're trying to have in the project, like we are trying to bring as much possible, reduce the cost from different sources. That's the idea in terms of sustainability.
All right. Thank you so much, Saeed, for those insights. Most certainly, the situation for girls and women's rights in Afghanistan is concerning due to gender backlash under the Taliban rule. And despite, of course, the challenges, this initiative, such as the Afghanistan Online University, is aiming to provide women and girls with greater access to education and promoting gender equality. And this initiative actually requires collaboration, partnership, and inclusivity to overcome challenges regarding or related to funding, infrastructure, and sustainability. Thank you so much, Saeed. And now hand over to Alex. Over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Saeed and Njavwa, for that informative discussion on gender backlash in Afghanistan and the Afghan Online University. It's really heartening to see how the idea of the online university, will provide an opportunity for Afghan women to access education and pursue their dreams, despite the challenges or the challenging circumstances that they face. It is a human right for every individual to be able to have access to education. So thank you so much, and thank you to our audience for the questions that are coming in the Q&A. I will encourage our speakers to start looking at those questions so that we can tackle them during our Q&A. It's now my pleasure to introduce our final pair of speakers, Noah Herfort and Nawshin Tabassum. Together, they will provide us with valuable insights into the global youth climate movement and its role in promoting a green economic mandate. Noah is a researcher and activist fighting for a livable planet. He holds a Master's of Public Administration from University College London, and he is the co-founder of Climate Vanguard, a youth-led think tank developing the radical transformations that stop Earth breakdown and build a just, habitable world. Nawshin is an intern working in the Gender Justice and Development Program at UNRISD. She is currently also doing her Master's in Analysis and Design of Social Protection Systems at Bonn-Rhein-Sieg University of Applied Sciences. Her research background is in gender, social policy, care work, representation, and migration. Over to you, Nawshin and Noah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. Just gonna share my screen. Do people see that? Is that active? Okay, great. Thanks, Alex, again for the introduction, and thank you for having me. My name is Noah. I'm the co-founder of Climate Vanguard, and over the past 6 months, together with the Green Economy Coalition, we were commissioned to do research on a global map of the youth climate movement. And in this short presentation, I'm going to present the main findings. So in terms of some background, the youth climate movement has been very good at two things. The first is that it sparked mass climate awareness and started a global conversation on climate and ecological breakdown. And through that global conversation, forced the climate and ecological crisis into the political limelight. But 4 years on from the first school strike, we have to have a sober analysis of where we find ourselves now. Fossil fuels are continuing to expand, nature is dying, and emissions are expanding. So clearly the root drivers of the climate and ecological emergency have remained untouched. Current policies still put us on track for around 3 degrees Celsius heating by 2100, which is incompatible with organized human life. And nature is continuing to be lost at an unprecedented rate as a 6th mass extinction remains unabated. So in order to charter a new movement direction, the Green Economy Coalition and Climate Vanguard came together to take stock of where the youth climate movement is, especially as we emerge out of 3 years of a global pandemic and a drastically transformed political economic landscape with the invasion of Ukraine and different regime changes across the world. So what we did is we created a first of its kind database, which compiled a digital stock take of 292 youth climate groups, 52 youth climate group survey responses, and 19 youth activist interviews. And what you can see on the screen here is the global distribution of the digital stock take, so where youth climate groups actually exist across the world. We then use this data to map the diverse theories of change that exist in the youth climate movement. So what you can see here is our conceptual model, which is broken down into 4 different archetypes. On the top, which is the green boxes, is the first archetype, which we've called eco-educator. And eco-educator groups identified the root cause of the climate and ecological emergency as an information deficit, that there's not enough awareness, and what we ought to be doing is increasing that awareness in order to get to a level where we can actually implement the transformations that we need to secure a just habitable world. On the bottom in the array of purple boxes is kind of the diametrically opposed archetype, which are the radical greens. And they say, actually, it's not an information deficit, it's not for a lack of awareness, it's a system itself, which is engineered in a certain way. And what we need to be doing is focusing on that system and ultimately replacing it with a new one, which is focus on a green economy that works in the interest of people and planet. And sandwiched between these different archetypes are a science champion and political mobilizer. So I'm going to be focusing specifically on science champion because that's especially pertinent. And the reason I say that is because science champion is largely modeled on the Fridays for Future strike model. So in comparison to the eco-educator group type, they say it's not for lack of awareness, it's actually that politicians don't understand how serious climate and ecological change is. So what we should be doing is convincing leaders to act on the science. And that brings us back to these very classic demands that we've all heard over the past couple of years, which have been centered on we need to listen to the science and we need to act on the science. So in terms of our results then, we've found that there's a very strong systemic analysis within the youth climate movement. Of all the survey respondents, 54% said that it's actually an economy that puts profit over people and planet that's at the root cause. And of these 54%, a further 89% said that this system is specifically capitalism and neocolonialism. They're already seeing a strategic winnowing of where the youth climate movement is. However, whilst there is some solidification or general agreement around that it's a system which is causing climate and ecological change, there is still a deficiency in a strategic culture in the youth climate movement. So yes, some groups say it's a system, but then their different missions, objectives, and activities are dispersed over a model, which suggests that there's no strategic coherence. And what we found in our investigation is that actually developing theory of change is something that's quite novel rather than routine. So in general, there's a lot of work to be done in synthesizing the strategy on a political economic plane. However, we did find a new wing of young people who are directly engaging on the political economic level. So instead of issuing vague demands of listening to the science or we need system change, they're actually fleshing out what system change looks with concrete policy proposals. And this is underpinned by their strategic culture. So they're engaging in the political economic level in connection with their understanding that it's a system which is at fault. So this is really encouraging because we're seeing a new direction and a new wing of young green economic reformers. However, our research also shows that these green economic reformers need support, so they need to be nurtured. And specific avenues of support are centered first and foremost on funding, which is what you're always going to hear in the youth climate space or in the climate space in general. And that funding can be dispersed over project funding, organizational funding, or even core funding. Another avenue of support is skills training. So groups express that they want communications training and also help with networking with more established green NGOs. And also organizational support. So actually creating a structure that is regenerative and mitigates with any type of burnout, which is a frequent issue within the youth climate space. And lastly, they expressed interest in vision building. So in a lot of our interviews, we had young people who struggled to actually put into words what a world transformed looks like, what a world that has overcome climate ecological breakdown and actually is in service of people and planet looks like. So there's space to introduce some radical imagination within this space in order to galvanize young people and also anchor them in a situation that we find ourselves in right now, which is by no means positive, but we need to keep on going, and that vision can help solidify that. So I'm going to stop here and transition to some questions.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Noah, for your insightful presentation and also for your team to give us this idea of how youth are actually collaborating to fight this challenge. First, I would like to know more about how the diversity of the youth climate movement and its geographical dispersion.
Yeah, so we were set out to map the global youth climate movement, and lo and behold, the movement is actually global, which is great. So we saw pretty equal dispersion amongst the global north and the global south and all of the different varieties of data collection, whether that was in the digital stock take or in the interviews or in the survey. I should also note that obviously when you're mapping something that's global, and in this case, constantly changing, it's very difficult to get an accurate representation. So I think actually the movement is even more diverse than we think it is. Because, for example, we encountered certain limitations within our research, one being that the stock take is digital. So we were finding groups with some type of digital footprint, whether that be social media or website. So actually, I'm sure there are a plethora of groups that are not engaged in the digital space who also exist, which just contributes to the diversity.
Yeah, very interesting because, yeah, it's just difficult to have a whole knowledge, and we always think that maybe North is doing more and global South is just, be the victim. But of course, there are also many movements that are initiated by the South. In terms of these organizations, how are these different groups? Do you find any fragmentation in their strategy or in their vision for the future?
Yeah, as I said, there's a slightly deficient strategic culture within the youth movement. And I think that's well evidenced in the fact that 54% identify the system as the root cause, but then only a further 50% go on to the vision of a green economy which is the adjacent vision. So it makes sense in terms of the radical green theory of change. So what we're seeing is a slight dispersion and a scattering across the theoretical model, which evidences that there actually needs to be a lot of work done in fully understanding the system, our role in it, and how we can shape our disruption of that system within our local context.
Yes, yes, yes. Because it's so global, it's like even any movement, it always like disperses, and we need to have some common ground and some common vision. Thank you for that. And finally, when you're like analyzing this whole report, how do you see for the future? Do you see that the climate movement is evolving, and or if there's any radical change in this time being?
Yeah. As can be seen with this wing of young green economic reformers, it does appear that the youth climate movement is radicalizing. And I think that's almost inevitable, because my introduction, I outlined that things are getting dramatically worse. And people are not going to sit by and watch the planet become uninhabitable and try the same old tactics. So escalation begets escalation. And what I'm thinking of right now is actually in May, this is a really interesting dynamic, is that Fridays for Future is evolving from school strikes to school occupations. So in May of this year, there could be hundreds of school and university occupations, which re-galvanize the movement and bring it back to the level that we haven't seen since 2019. So I'm very encouraged by what's going on. I think there's a lot of work to be done. I have hope. It's an active hope though, because we need to be organizing, getting out in the streets. But yeah, the research was really great in order to get a snapshot, and now more work needs to be done in order to galvanize this emerging wing.
Yes, especially about getting like understanding where we are currently is, it's very important for the future direction. And lastly, I would also like to know that when you're like, you had some assumption before doing the research, but when you did it and afterwards, did you find any like different thing that you haven't thought before, or there's like something that you didn't predict?
Yeah, I think two things. So the first is that the movement is not just Fridays for Future. And I think that's a media representation that we get quite frequently, is that it's Fridays for Future and it's led by Greta. But in fact, it's very diverse, and there are so many different theories of change. And I think the second thing that surprised me is the importance of local context. In mapping the radical green archetype, Jack and I, who I conducted this research with, we found frequently that local context was very influential. For example, there were a couple of West African youth climate groups who identified education, which is again in that eco-educator theory of change, as being a really important building block in a radical theory of change and actually changing the system. So going even more precise and on a granular level and figuring out which context these groups are operating in is very important, and something that I took away from the project.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we all learned something today, and especially if we talk about involvement of the state or involvement of the NGOs, but the roots, the youth who are actually going to suffer in the future, their initiatives are actually so much important and what they want for their future. So thank you to you and to your team for doing this. And yeah, over to Alex now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Noah and Nawshin, for such an insightful discussion, thought-provoking discussion on mapping the global youth climate movement and the role it plays in shaping a green economic mandate. It's quite inspiring to hear that, and also to see how the youth are taking leadership in tackling climate change and also advocating for a more sustainable future. It's time for our Q&A after listening to these three different and unique conversations. I'm thankful that we've been able to have some questions in our Q&A. I noted a few of the questions have been responded to, but we'll still ask our speakers to probably elaborate above that. So I wish to thank the audience for taking your time to post these very interesting questions. So we'll begin with the questions that are specific to particular speakers, and perhaps move to any general questions during which any one of the speakers can come in and respond. So I will start with our first question. In this case, I think I will find out from Srity. audience member knows there were such kind of, menstrual pads available for some poor people living in the rural areas in the country of Ethiopia. But in terms of its accessibility to larger number of people, they have some reservations around that. In the organization which they are working, which is one that focuses on girls who look, for such affordable and environmental and reproductive friendly pads, they would like to know how they can be included in this particular project.
Thank you for the question. First of all, I answered the question, but I would like to elaborate it more. Can you hear me all? Yeah. Okay. So unfortunately, because of some funding issues, the biggest challenge was this funding, but also so for other reason we couldn't continue to our startup. But I also found that there is some local NGOs and also small level private startup company. They are trying to actually produce more low cost sanitary napkin. The problem is when you're trying to make low cost, it's actually really hard to make it also eco-friendly. So there is a lot of things you have to think about. But two example I can talk about that who are doing really good job, basically from India. So one is Eco-Feme and another is Sati Pack. So both of them doing great job, producing more eco-friendly sanitary napkin. You can reusable and also biodegradable. So maybe you can check their work.
Thank you, Srity, for that perspective. There is also another question here from a panel from an audience member in Uganda. One of the challenges that they are facing in Uganda, though the majority of survivors of gender-based violence are women, they also find that some men are also heavily affected, but don't come out to seek support. So the question is, how have you handled such cases so that men can also speak and get support in case you have had any experiences of that?
Okay, so I think male engagement in addressing gender-based violence is relatively new, but actually it's really important to include them into policy and practice. So recent year, UN Women actually started a campaign He for She, so where actually a male can support other female. But talking about a male survivor, I believe it's all about raising awareness. So when we raise awareness through a workshop or policy, some project or during different program, I think it will be always helpful to end the stigma or the taboo in our society. And when we actually started raising awareness, it will also help them to talk about it and reporting in their violence story. And also we also can include this in the education or other prevention efforts. I think all we have to do is talk about it and raise other to help them to raise their voice, support them. So yeah, this is what we actually can do.
Thank you so much, Srity. I think there is an addition from Nawshin.
Yeah, just to complement Srity, that for the men, because we call it Ministration Cost, so it's not only women, it's also the men of the house who also have to invest a lot in this sanitary system. So I think, yeah, if we have something which is sustainable and also eco-friendly, it will not only help women, but also for the whole economy of the household. So it is not only a female concern, but also a male concern. Thank you.
Thank you for that addition, Nawshin. I would like to bring in Syed. I'm not sure if you would like to elaborate on the questions that have been posed. I know that you have started to respond to them, but maybe for the bigger audience, you might want just to, come in and elaborate on, how the Taliban explain, this particular attitude that they have in respect to women, but also looking at whether there is any contact to discuss the women's issues.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks to Dr. Ibrahim for raising the question. So the Taliban argument is that these restrictions are to uphold the Islamic morality and protect women's honor and dignity. That's their belief and the way they interpret Islam from their perspective. But for sure, that does not justify that you take the basic rights of a human. That even in Islam, in many Islamic countries, as I emphasized earlier, women have right to education, to work, to move freely without any man's help or having a man accompanying her. And the next question that have I had a contact with the Taliban about the project? The committee has not made any contact for sure, but what I discovered during my research and feasibility study is still online degree is not recognized in Afghanistan, and that can be one other challenge. But still, as I mentioned, there should be a room for lobbying, for discussion with Taliban, and also with some conditions so that they can be more flexible and open a space for girls and women. And there was also one last question, a general question, what can be a difficult part of implementing this project? First, the basic need is the funding, securing the funding. That can be difficult, but the next one will be getting into discussion with Taliban and bringing them to the table of discussion so that they can welcome such initiative and do not restrict Afghans' access to this online university. So this can be the challenge. So, but again, in terms of solving the issue, for sure, getting into discussion with them, that can be the solution. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Syed. I see that there's a question in the chat about whether we can share the presentation. So in the meantime, I think I can only say that we'll check with our panelists and we'll be able to get back to you on that. But please be reminded to access our website, because this is also going to be posted on the website in terms of the recording. But regarding the presentation, we will come back to you on that. Our next question, the next question I was looking at here, I think Noah and Jack, you probably have just answered that. It started with a congratulatory message in terms of the work that you are doing with Climate Vanguard. So I will move to the next question. There's a question here, but I think this is quite a general question to all the panelists, trying to inquire what the most difficult part of implementation of each of the innovations is, and how can we interact more to come up with revolutionary solutions to some of the global issues. I think I will give you a minute to think about that. I saw a hand up from Njavwa, and I just wanted to find out whether you wanted to comment in the previous question or you wanted to start tackling this question.
I wanted to comment on the previous question on what Zahid said concerning the Taliban's attitude towards women and girls. And I think it really goes beyond policies and practices. And this backlash is, stemming from cultural and social attitudes towards women, and more concerned with, the historical, patriarchal and conservative way. And of course, they say, well, we want to promote, we're going to promote gender equality, and they vowed, to support women based on the Islamic law, but what is obtaining on the ground is definitely different. And currently, of course, they are saying, no, this ban is temporal, and they will allow girls to go back to school, but we are yet to see that and see if they really stick to these things. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Njavwa, for that addition. So in terms of the next question that I have just posed to you, Is there anyone who would like to go first? Sure, Jack.
Yeah, I'm happy to try and answer that for our project of mapping the global youth climate movement. I think that one of the challenges of implementation or continuing this work is that the youth climate movement is constantly changing. So it requires almost a continuous assessment and research. So this is sort of like a snapshot into this moment into the youth climate movement, but then it would then require another piece of research at a certain date in the future to understand how it's changing and evolving. And that obviously takes a lot of time and continuous engagement. So that's definitely one challenge of engaging with a pretty fast moving and changing landscape, if you will. And I guess in terms of how can we interact more to come up with some of the revolutionary solutions, I think that for like one of the things that we were doing in our project was trying to map some of the needs of the youth climate groups. And these needs really need to be met in order to free up some of the capacity of these young people to, for instance, take on more collaboration with other groups, to engage with members of civil society, other NGOs, other movements, because as is, they're very stretched and very low on time and overworked quite literally. And so I think answering some of these needs that we identified from them would really go a long way in helping to free up some capacity to increase their change-making potential. But that really starts with listening, like just literally listening to the needs that they're expressing and trying to meet those in the best way possible.
Thank you so much, Jack. Not sure if there's anyone else that would like to add to that. If not, then we'll move to the next question. I think this, perhaps Jack or Noah, you could also look into that. Seems like there is more different networks that are connecting together. But the question the member is asking here is whether there is a strong movement towards connecting with UNI, UN Academic Impact in universities working on the 17 SDGs.
I can start. So I'm actually not too familiar with UNAI, but I do think, of course, that research is really essential in building a strong movement, especially if it's engaging in political economy. We actually need to be researching what type of policies we want to propose and the ones that we want to fight for. And I think although there are certain issues, I would say with the SDGs, they provide a certain template upon which we can draw from. But I'm looking forward to actually checking out UNAI and learning more about it. Thank you for prompting me.
Thank you so much, Noah. I think we could also use the platform with the network as well to try to see where we can find, synergies with UNAI to make sure that we're working in tandem together moving forward. And with that, of course, I would also like to encourage all the participants to look into the membership for the network. You'll find that information on our website. We encourage you to register and become a member of the network so that we can continue to have these conversations. A hand up from Nawshin. I would like to give you the floor now in case you have any inputs.
Not only inputs, but I think I saw a question in the chat where they say that if there's any legal framework for protecting vulnerable population like women and children in Bangladesh, like instead of in the question Q&A, it was in the chat. So I think that's why we missed it. But I was just likely short to just answer that of course I'm from Bangladesh. So we in the legal framework, it's strongly stated that vulnerable population should be protected, and we are also signatory of CEDAW that was specifically mandatory for us to actually protect this vulnerable population. But the problem in the developing countries is always that there's always a gap between what is in the legal framework and what is in the field. So that's why there are some discrepancies, but yeah, we are working for that. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Nawshin, for that. I know that our time is up. I would like just perhaps to ask for 2 extra minutes, and then we will be closing. There was a question about how to ensure people with disabilities are included in this program. It wasn't specific to which particular program, so I will just ask for one comment from each of you, and then we close.
Okay, thank you. I would go first, I guess. I mean, of course, I would talk about the online university, and I think maybe one important thing to, when you're dealing with persons with disabilities, it's always bordering on 2 things: removing barriers and providing support. And so in this case, with the online university, I think in terms of infrastructure, and technology, is putting in place things that can definitely help persons with disabilities and equip them with learning. And also in terms of maybe the good part is that it's an online university, so there's nothing to hinder them in terms of accessing the buildings. Everything can be done online, but most definitely I think there will be need to invest into things that can definitely help persons with disabilities learn online, and probably also invest in people that can help with interpreting sign language and providing all that support.
Thank you so much, Njavwa. Anyone else from our speakers?
Just seconding the Njavwa comments. For sure, this online university is a place that does not discriminate the basis of gender. It's a safe, secure, inclusive for everyone, and that's the good thing about having an online university for Afghans, especially in exile, and those who are interested in the topic of Afghanistan. Thanks.
Thank you, Syed. In the interest of time, I'd like to thank you all for participating in this Q&A, for the questions from our audience members, but also your responses, all of you, our speakers. Your perspectives and experiences have truly been inspiring and thought-provoking. We have now come to the end of our discussions. I hope that you found the discussions insightful and thought-provoking, as well as action-provoking. We have heard from our speakers who are taking innovative approaches to address pressing ecological and social issues. And thank you for joining us today. These stories and experiences have shown us that we all can contribute to making a positive difference in our communities. So lastly, on behalf of our team, I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to all our attendees for joining us today. I would like to see you, register for membership in the network. Please visit us on our social media platforms, but also on our website. The speakers for sharing your experiences, expertise, and insights with us, and the organizers, especially our technical support team, for your hard work in putting this event together and ensuring that it ran smoothly without any glitches. I hope you all found the webinar very informative and valuable as much as I did. Thank you all for your contributions to this webinar, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.